An abridgment of Thomas Manton's commentary on the Epistle of James chapter 4 verse 3. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. In this verse, the apostle anticipates an objection from his readers, who might claim, "We do ask and go to God in daily prayers." His response is pointed and convicting. You ask indeed, but because of your wrong motives, you cannot complain of not being heard. Do you want to make God a servant to your desires? To confront their misunderstanding, he exposes the true aim of their prayers, namely, the pursuit of a worldly and self-centered life. He writes, "You ask, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." This verse highlights a profound truth about prayer. Its efficacy is deeply tied to the motives and aims of the one praying. The purpose behind prayer is the essence of its spiritual quality, for it reveals the heart's true desires. Motives are not secondary matters. They are the very offspring of the soul, shaping and defining every action. Just as actions in themselves may be neutral or even good, a wrong motive can corrupt them. To eat out of necessity is a duty we owe to our nature, but to eat out of wantonness reveals the indulgence of worldly desire. Similarly, in prayer, when the motive shifts from glorifying God to seeking self-interest, it ceases to be true worship and becomes an act of self-seeking. This principle is foundational to the spiritual life, which Paul describes as living for God. Galatians 2 verse 19. The difference between a worldly and a spiritual life lies in this very distinction. The former seeks self, while the latter seeks God. Worship, in particular, demands pure motives, for it is in worship that the soul is most directly set before God to glorify Him. To approach God in prayer with selfish aims is to profane the sacred. It is not enough to focus on the manner of prayer or even the fervency with which it is offered. Many are content with stirring their emotions or intensifying their pleas, but they fail to consider the ultimate purpose of their prayers. While fervency is commendable, like an arrow drawn with all one's strength, it must be directed toward a godly aim. Worldly desires may produce strong feelings, but such feelings, if misplaced, do not honor God. Even eloquence or fluency in prayer, though admirable, is not sufficient. God must not only be the object of our prayer, but also its ultimate purpose. As the psalmist reminds us, serve the Lord with gladness. Come before Him with joyful songs, Psalm 100 verse 2. When prayers are offered with wrong motives, they are inevitably corrupted. Some seek God for blatantly sinful or worldly ends. They attempt to involve God in their schemes. Much like Solomon warns, the sacrifice of the wicked is detestable. How much more so when brought with evil intent? Proverbs 21 verse 27. Others treat God as a servant of their desires, seeking Him merely as a means to an end. Consider the man who approached Christ, saying, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Luke 12 verse 13. Such requests reduce the divine to a tool for personal gain, seeking blessings to gratify pride, wealth, or even revenge. There are also those who pray for spiritual blessings with an entirely selfish perspective. They ask for forgiveness, grace, or faith not out of a desire to glorify God but solely to escape judgment or find personal comfort. While God indeed desires our comfort, He wills that it be rooted in His glory. Paul reminds us that God's blessings are given to the praise of His glorious grace. Ephesians 1 verse 6. Only when our requests align with God's purposes can they be considered truly godly. Even in asking for temporal blessings, the heart must be set on using these gifts to serve God rather than indulging in worldly ease or vanity. Given the gravity of these truths, how can one ensure pure motives in prayer? This question drives us to recognize the necessity of divine help. True prayer is not a natural act. It is a supernatural work that requires the Spirit's enabling. As Jesus teaches, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. John 3 verse 6. Left to itself, human nature inevitably seeks self-preservation and comfort. Therefore, Believers must continually seek God's grace to purify their hearts and align their desires with His will. As Paul writes, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, in accordance with God's will. Romans 8 verses 26 to 27. Moreover, mortification of the flesh is essential, for the heart's overflow dictates the substance of our prayers. Jesus warns, out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. Matthew 12 verse 34. Prayers offered with worldly motives are often unsuccessful. God's glory is both the end of prayer and the foundation of hope. To approach God with selfish aims is to misunderstand the nature of prayer entirely. The Spirit's voice is the only one God acknowledges in prayer, for it speaks according to His will. Paul reminds us, He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit. Romans 8 verse 27. A worldly groan is met with divine refutation, while spiritual sighs are received with favor. As James notes earlier, when prayers are framed by selfishness, they are not only unanswered but also dishonor God. They attempt to yoke Him with sin, as Isaiah laments, "You have burdened me with your sins." Isaiah 43 verse 24. When prayers seem unanswered, believers must examine their motives rather than question God's faithfulness. Have our requests been shaped by self-interest? Were we seeking life for ease, safety for pleasure, or blessings for personal pride? The psalmist assures us that the Lord hears the desire of the afflicted. He encourages them and listens to their cry. Psalm 10 verse 17. Holy desires, rooted in God's glory, are always met with His favor. As we approach the throne of grace, may our prayers be offered with hearts aligned to His purposes, seeking not our own gain but the glory of the one who hears and answers according to His will.